Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and let's talk about money. This video is going to be divided up into 4 main sections, each one of them timestamped down below in case you want to jump to any particular one of them. And I may ramble a bit, I may talk over myself, I may awkwardly pause, I may even end up scrapping the entire video, because when you're talking about money, it's never easy, it's never clear, and it's always a mess. It just is. It's just the very nature of the conversation is it's just a mess. So we'll get into it. We'll do whatever. But the 4 parts are as follows. We're going to talk about Patreon and GoFundMe. I'll have a GoFundMe. I have a Patreon. We'll talk about that first. We're going to go from there into the 3 pillars of how you have to make money if you want to survive as a content creator. The 3 ways any channel ultimately tries to tackle it and the various nuances therein. It's something I've talked about in the past, but I think it's worth talking about again. I'm going to talk about how much I make currently from YouTube, with not like directly, but we'll talk about some numbers around how much I make, how much I currently need to pay my bills, practically speaking. It's not going to be directly into the every degree of everything. It's going to be generalities, because I think it's not that it's going to be generalities. We'll talk about it. We'll get to it. Jump to the timestamp in case you want to find out that juicy piece of information. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about my approach to the entire situation in general, the way I plan on handling this transition, and the approach I'm taking towards all these aspects wrapped together. You can watch any of this, none of this. It's completely up to you how interesting you find it and what you want to do next. In case you're jumping in here with absolutely no context of what's going on, last week I put up a video on the channel titled I Quit. More specifically, I quit my day job. For those who didn't know, and some of you appear to not have known, which is very entertaining for me in general, but for those who didn't know, I have a day job, and had a day job, I guess. By the time you're watching this, I had a day job, past tense. And that day job was the main way I made money. Frankly speaking, it's the main source of income that my family had, because I had a decent position at a decent company that I've been at for 8 years, and it has been overall a very positive experience working for that company, one that I was on the way towards walking away from over time. I thought I was, 2 to 5 years out from that transition into making YouTube my full-time career, but the past year or so things have escalated and things have gotten a little messy and toxic there, not just with me, by the way, in case anyone's wondering, but like with multiple employees having issues and frustrations with the workplace, some people leaving, others looking for jobs. And I am one of those who chose to leave, given the context. You can watch the video, I'll link it down below, titled I Quit. It goes into, well, some things more than others. We'll talk about that. This is also part 2, in a sense, meaning I said in that video there are going to be 3 videos total, and maybe more. We'll talk about that. The first was the I Quit video. The second is the nature of monetization, my approach to the channel, and what I plan on doing. That's this video here. And then the third is going to be a bit of a history of just everything that happened with me, from start to finish, how I got here. I don't know where start will be, but it's just going to be just a history of who I am and how I got from somewhere to here. I just don't know where I'm going to start. Am I going to start like when I was in 4th grade, or am I going to start when I got into board games? I don't really know, and I may split that up into several videos. It depends how long it ultimately goes on. We'll see. But I just figure like this is a big transition for me. It's a good point to start that conversation. But that's the background, so to speak. So that's what's going on. YouTube is now my full-time job, earlier than planned, something I've been working towards for the past 2 years, but earlier than planned and earlier than I was ready for. And so let's talk about money. Let's talk about monetization. Starting off with point 1, like I said already, Patreon and GoFundMe. I'm including this early into the video. I probably should have included in the first minute, but early into the video because the very nature of the YouTube algorithms that people drop out of videos, relatively quickly, different people. However many people started this video, let's just make up numbers. Let's say 5,000 people started this video, and then by now, 1,000 of you are already gone. And the problem is those 1,000 of you that are already gone can't hear me say that. There's this drop-off over time as far as how long into any given video someone makes it. Obviously, the more entertaining or spicy the conversation, the longer people will make it. But there's always a trend, so I do want to include this early on. Not early on enough, but early on that I talked about this briefly in my last video, in the I Quit one. But if you get value from this channel, your support would be tremendously appreciated. Specifically if you get value. Not just like, oh, hey, not like from a sense of charity or just giving because I'm in a current transitional space, I'll make the transitional space. We'll talk about that again. That's going to be point 4, my approach to the situation. I'm fine. I will be fine. We'll talk about it more in point 4. But if you do get value from the channel, your support would be appreciated, either on Patreon, which many of you have already joined up, which is tremendously appreciated. Alternatively, I've gotten enough requests. I wasn't planning on doing this initially, but I've gotten enough requests that I will be doing a GoFundMe as well. I'll have a GoFundMe link in the description down below. Basically, I got enough requests for people who wanted to give on a one-time basis as opposed to a recurring basis, as well as people who have an issue with Patreon directly, didn't want to deal with that. So I'll be setting up a GoFundMe for anyone who wants to deal with that. Either option, whatever you prefer. There are reasons to do a GoFundMe as well, but I was debating. I just didn't want to like push people in 2 different directions. I like giving a focused approach. It just got enough questions about it. Specifically, the GoFundMe is also relevant because part of what I plan on doing, us going full-time with this channel, is investing in some other supplies to do some other things. Specifically, I want to get a 3rd camera angle for gameplays and reviews because I think it adds dimension to the presentation, and so I'll be hopefully adding that. It adds a bit more work, but I have more time now, so I'll take care of that. But that does mean around $3,000 between the camera and the lens. I also want to get a camera for vlogging, and I'll have all this detailed stuff in the GoFundMe in case you want it, but I also plan on getting a camera for vlogging. I'm still debating between a few, but one of the ones I'm looking at is the Sony ZV-1. It's going to be roughly $750. It's so that whenever I go to conventions or things like that, I can come back with actually decent content as opposed to the last time I did it where I filmed it all on my phone. I also plan on getting a color printer. Looking into color printer options, the balance there is that cheaper color printers, at home for context I have a plain black and white printer, but cheaper color printers cost a lot more over time per page. More expensive color printers reduce that cost per page, but they cost more initially. As to why I want a color printer is because I do a lot of prototype coverage, and that means a lot of the time for Kickstarter prototypes, a lot of the time companies are sending me rules and I have to print them out, and printing out 50, 60 pages of color prototype rules is not actually as cheap as you might think. Cost per printing on pages can range from like 7 cents on the low end to 20, 25 cents for full color pages, depending on the printer costs. It can get expensive pretty quickly, and yes, I've done black and white, and sometimes it's a bit of a mess trying to go through the illustration. So it's a prerequisite to the job, so to speak. It's something that is helpful for covering Kickstarter prototypes, so I plan on looking into that. And then lastly, I need a few new SD cards, just because I have a few, but I need some backups. I need some stuff around. Not a lot. It's like $100, something like that, for getting a whole bunch of them. But again, it all adds up, and this is just at a transitionary time when I'm leaving a full paycheck behind. And so it's helpful to have whatever support you're able to give. To be very clear, I'm 99% certain I'm getting most of these things, not necessarily all, but most of these things regardless. I plan on investing heavily into YouTube being my full-time career, and that does mean improving the quality of the content in whatever way I possibly can. And if that means I take a hit right now, that's fine. That's part of the process. I ran a GoFundMe once before to get a 3rd camera angle, to get this guy up here, which you can't see intentionally. You can't see it, you're not supposed to, but for playthroughs, reviews, I ran a GoFundMe around 15 months ago to help me get a 2nd camera back then, and that was very much appreciated, and this is round 2 of that. So whether it's Patreon, whether it's a GoFundMe, and if you've already given on Patreon, if you already are a patron or have recently become a patron, please don't give more. Like, I'm not trying to get people to like just keep on giving. Just if you are someone who gets value out of the channel, it is tremendously appreciated. And that's point 1, Patreon and GoFundMe. I don't like doing a heavy push, so I kind of talk about it, I get into it, but I really don't like heavily doing. If you get, whatever you do is helpful and appreciated, but also 100% and obviously not required or anything like that. It's just, it ultimately comes down to well, your decision. Point number 2. Again, I said it from the beginning, this is uncomfortable. This is just, it's inherently uncomfortable to do this stuff. I'm not running, like, it's not like I'm running a Kickstarter where I'm like, here's all the promos that you're buying. At some point, maybe that will become the way I support the channel. We'll talk about that shortly. This is going to be actually right now, point 2, the 3 pillars. But I'm not set up for that at the moment. I didn't plan on making this career change this early, and so I'm still figuring those things out. That will go back to point 4, a combination of point 2 and point 4, how you support a channel, and point 4, what I plan on doing and my approach to the situation. So, point number 2, the 3 pillars of paying the bills as a content creator. Being in board games full-time is something that there are surprisingly a lot of people who do so, but not as many who do so in a way that actually get to fully participate in parts of the hobby that aren't just work. Meaning it's easy to run a game store, and well, easy is a relative term. It's hard to run a game store. It's not necessarily a lot of money, but there's people in this board game space in a variety of different ways. From anything from being part of a game company, helping them do games, be customer service in that, running a game store, being a content creator, designing games. There's so many facets of this board game hobby. There's people who are purely 100% in this hobby as peripherals, game tables, game accessories, various inserts. There's entire divisions of people who are in this hobby full-time in different ways. Within the subset of content creation, there are, I believe, a handful. I don't know the full number, but I believe there's probably somewhere, I don't want to say numbers. There's a handful of people who are in the content creation space full-time. There's a variety of YouTubers. There's Dice Tower. There's the Dice Tower crew there. Shut Up and Sit Down. I think many of them are in it full-time. I know John Gets Games does this full-time. Rado does this full-time. There are a bunch of people out there, but not necessarily a ton. I don't know the firm numbers. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20. There's not a ton of people out there because, frankly speaking, for most people, it is very, very hard to make the numbers work as a content creator. It just is. And we'll get into the whole why and how and all that. I am already in a tremendously fortunate position just by the very fact that I can even have this conversation as a hypothetical. Meaning, to me, again, we'll talk about my finances in point 3, but I'm already in a fortunate position just to begin with, to be very, very clear. And I'm very appreciative of that. The 3 primary ways that you can make it as a content creator, the 3 primary ways that you get money, whether that money is just paying for your time, whether that money is enabling you to make it full-time, whatever degree of money it is, there's 3 primary aspects. There's ad revenue directly from Google, from YouTube. There's direct ad revenue from YouTube. That is option 1. We'll get back to it in a second. Option 2 is crowd support. That's you. That's the fact that the audience values the content and that they are paying to keep that content creator's time reimbursed. Again, I use the words time reimbursed because sometimes it's just, hey, I'm putting time into this channel and whatever you can do to pay me for the time is helpful. Other times it's, hey, this is my job and I need to pay the bills. But both of them come down to the same thing, which is the crowd giving the content creator money in some way, shape, or form. That could be Patreon, it could be GoFundMe, it could be Kickstarter, it could be GameFound, it could be a donate button on the website, it could be PayPal, it could be any of these forms, but it's some variety of the crowd supporting the content creator. And then point 3 is taking money from, I guess at least 4. Let's go with 4. Point 3 is taking money from publishers for direct content. That a publisher is putting out a game and you're doing a sponsored playthrough. You're doing a sponsored preview. You're doing some sort of directly sponsored content, a sponsored how to play, that the publisher is paying you to cover the game. And then point 4, which is kind of a partial point 3, but splitting it up, is going to be sponsorships for the channel. And that's partial. I split it into its own part because sometimes sponsorships could come from outside the board game space. But a sponsorship for the channel is not that you're getting paid for this playthrough, it's that you're getting paid, like this channel is sponsored by insert game store name, insert board game table, insert GameFound. At one point I had a GameFound sponsorship, I think I still do, but it's in the works, whatever. But it's the idea that you have a sponsorship that is not sponsoring the direct thing that you are doing, but a sponsor of the channel. It's an ad spot in the video. Hey, Skillshare, congratulations, I just learned how to do these 14 things on Skillshare, and the first 1,000 people to sign up via the link below will get a first free month. I've never used Skillshare, but I have debated whether I should, because there's some stuff I need to look into now, like B-roll and things like that, so maybe now's the time to look into Skillshare for myself. But whatever. Anyways, yeah, sponsorships. Sponsorships is number 4. Those are the 4 primary ways that you support a channel. And the way you have to do this is you just have to make sure that your expenses are met. Whether it's time, whether it's actual expenses, depends on what level of investment you're throwing in there. And this is where who you are matters tremendously as well. If you're a single individual living in an apartment, you might be able to get by on $40K a year. If you're maybe more, maybe less, depends where you live. If you're someone like myself, we'll talk about myself in point number 3. If you're someone like the Dice Tower, you have an entire production team of people to run. There's like a whole lot going on there. I don't think people realize, understand, or appreciate how much expenses go into running something like the Dice Tower. It is not insignificant in the slightest. It's huge, it's tremendous, and kudos to Tom and the team there for what they're doing. But expenses range all over the place. As far as those options, I'm personally, I guess this leans to point 4 more, currently my main sources of support come from, ad revenue directly from YouTube, and then from you, primarily over on Patreon, and then GoFundMe, once or twice. That's the primary ways I look at it. I do get a bit from publisher sponsorships, meaning I have had GameFound be a sponsor at times. I've had various board game table companies sponsor me for certain video segments, so I've occasionally dabbled in small degrees of sponsorship, enough to give extra money, but certainly not enough to consider it like, oh, sponsorship's a staple of the channel. And then as far as taking money from publishers directly for content, that's something I prefer not to do and have generally tried to avoid. I completely understand anyone who does it for any reason whatsoever. I just don't like to do it. That's the short version. We'll come back to that in point 4. But those are the primary ways you have to make money. You have to make all those add up together to be able to support what you're doing, the time you're investing, the cost of the equipment. I mean, I'm about to buy my 3rd camera. That's going to be $15,000 total invested into, by the time I'm done with this 3rd round of purchases. I made my 1st round. When I first started doing the channel, the first time I bought a professional camera and I moved away from just filming on a phone, I basically had like made $2,000 on the channel. Not like at once. I made $2,000 over like several months of, ads and some Patreon and all that. And then I sat there and spent $5,000. And I went $3,000 in the red to support doing content. The next time round, it was very much that pain was significantly eased by, I ran a GoFundMe for around $4,500 worth of expenses, and I got around $3,200 on GoFundMe. That was February of last year. And that significantly ease the pain of the 2nd round of purchases. It made that so I was spending, $1,200, $1,400 instead of $4,500. And then this 3rd time, it's worse and better. It's worse because I'm transitioning away from a paycheck and then spending $5,000 or $4,500, whatever it is. It's better because now I'm not just investing in a side thing, I'm investing fully into a job. But the cost of equipment alone, depending on who you are, can be astronomical. Again, consider someone like the Dice Tower who has, how many computers do they have? Just the computers alone. Like, I'm not upgrading my computer right now. I'm not. At some point, I might. Video processing is an entirely different beast, and you need good computers to do so. And so there's a conversation at some point where I'm spending a whole chunk of money buying a good laptop or a good desktop, a better laptop, a better desktop, to enable myself to do more. For right now, I'm not trying to do that because my computer does the job, and at times it slows up on 4K video and things like that. But again, expenses, time, equipment, all those things all need to be paid for by these 4 avenues of support. And board games are still a small space, comparatively speaking, compared to anything out there. I mean, the top board game channels, Shut Up and Sit Down, the Dice Tower, the only board game channels that have hundreds of thousands of... What is Dice Tower up to? What are they up to in terms of subscribers? I can't even remember the number they're up to. But the largest channels in our space pale in comparison to the tiniest video game channels out there. We are still a tiny segment of the hobby, which just practically speaking means it is even harder to really make it as a board game content creator, comparatively speaking, to insert board game, video games, insert tech, or whatever different areas there are. I mean, heck, you can go into yarn or literally like just bunnies. My mother has a bunny. This is a weird tangent we're getting into. My mother has a bunny, and she subscribes to several bunny channels that have millions of subscribers. They just have bunnies, and they show you how to build houses and buy their stuff, and they have bunnies. There's huge spaces out there. Board games is not one of them, and so that factors into all of that, which brings us to the spicy point, the fun one. Point number 3, how much do I make and how much do I need? It's not going to be that spicy. I am going to give away information here, but it's not going to be that spicy because it's going to be generalities with a degree of caveats. And this is something that, like Tom over the Dice Tower, Tom Vassell, he talked about this recently in a board game breakfast. He said, how much do we make? And the answer was, it's none of your business. And he's right. He's right. I'm probably making a huge mistake even going into generalities here, but it's a judgment call. It's a judgment call as to what to do. The reason it's a huge mistake is because either you're projecting to the world of what a horrible decision you're making being in content creation where there's not that much money. On the flip side, you're projecting to the world, look how much money I'm making, and you guys shouldn't give me anything because you thought I was making this, and I'm really making that, and I'm rolling in it. No matter what you do, as soon as you give away information, you're kind of setting the groundwork for someone to be potentially upset one way or the other. And I've already gotten that. On the I Quit video, I've gotten tremendous amounts of support, which I'm incredibly grateful. That support does not just mean, someone becoming a patron. That just the kind words, the various things people have said, anything from that they've been watching me for 2 years and I've become part of the daily routine, to people who wrote me off initially, but then just started watching me again and again. Eventually I grew on them. any number of different comments I've gotten are incredibly supportive. But along the way, there's things on all sides. There are people who are like, how in the world, like, how irresponsible can you be to quit a job to go into board games? And the answer is, I'm not completely irresponsible. I'm stepping off a ledge, but I'm not completely irresponsible. But there's a lot of conversations on both sides. And again, giving away any degree of financial information inherently has risks attached to it. But nothing ventured, nothing gained. So let's talk money. Let's talk numbers and stuff like that. And again, there's going to be generalities. It's not going to be like, here's exactly how much I make and here's whatever. The short version is I don't know exactly what my expenses are, not yet. And I'm still going to be figuring that out. The reason I don't know my expenses dead even is, first of all, I don't budget the way I should. I used to be very good at budgeting. That was before. I used to have a regular monthly budget. I could have told you our expenses every single month on a regular basis, not a problem at all. I still have the spreadsheets that I built, the ways I track things. If you follow my channel long enough, this shouldn't be a surprise to you. The surprise should be that I don't budget now. The reason I don't budget now is for the same reason that many of you were surprised that I even had a day job this entire time, which is things go out the window when you push yourself that much. And over the past 2 years, I have pushed myself that much. I had a day job, I have a family, I've been doing 11 videos a week, I've been playing 169 games this past quarter. You push enough things into a small enough space and the other things kind of go flying off the side. And one of those things was budgeting. And so I have not been budgeting properly the past 2 years the way I used to in the past. It does involve a last-minute dash every year when I do taxes, and that's a cost you pay. Again, there's always trade-offs in life, and budgeting was one of the trade-offs. So I don't have a firm exact amount of how much I spend, but the rough numbers of my current expenditure as a family living in Ohio, you can look up whatever online numbers as far as whatever is reasonable or not. I think it's within the realm of reason, but who knows. Currently, my expenses are somewhere in the range of $90,000 to $100,000 a year. That's what it costs to live as a family of 6 in Cleveland, Ohio, in the suburbs-ish, adjacent to the city, right next to the city, whatever it is. That's roughly what it costs me. To some of you, that number is astronomical. To some of you, you're like, $100,000 a year, that's what it costs? That's a tremendous amount. And to others, you're like, $100,000 a year, he survives on that little? Again, this is why it's inherently problematic to give numbers. There's going to be a handful of people who are like, that sounds about right, and there's going to be people on both sides thinking I spend too much or too little. It is what it is. It's what I spend. The reason there's a large enough range is, just to give you an example, is over the past 2 months, we had $7,000 in dental expenses from 2 of our kids. So we had a set of retainers for my daughter, and then my son had emergency dental surgery, and those things add up. Those giant unknowns shift the numbers fairly widely. So I have a rough idea of how much our expenditures are. I don't have a firm idea of how they'll be exactly. It's something I'm going to be figuring out. The nice thing about quitting a job and having more time is I'll probably go back to budgeting at some point, or maybe, hopefully, I probably should. It's a good use of time. But that's my rough expenditures. That's what it costs to just keep things running. And again, we'll get to step 4 shortly. Step 4 is the next part. Step 4 is my approach to the entire situation, because I will not starve. That's not a question at all. This is not a situation in which I have to worry about paying the bills. This is a situation in which there is a potential deficit on my expenses versus my income, but I'm fine. We'll talk about that in point 4. Point 3 is still, okay, great. So now $90,000 to $100,000 a year is my expenses. Well, where's that coming from? I just walked away from a full-time job. Is that fine? Is that not fine? The answer is it's mostly fine, question mark. Some numbers you can see already. Patreon, right now, I'm getting $2,500 a month from Patreon. That's a public number. No surprises there. That's $30,000 a year. Now, for context, that number was $1,900 a month, a week ago. But as of the I Quit video, a whole bunch of you stepped up, and I really appreciate it. A whole bunch of you appreciated what the value that the videos that I've been putting out and felt that there was value there and became patrons. And so that number jumped from $1,900 a month to $2,500 a month. I don't know if it'll maintain or not. The very nature of these conversations is that sometimes when there's a moment of need, people give, and then over time it peters off. And it's not said from a stance of judgment. I've done the same. I'm a patron of a handful of channels, but in times of need, I've become a patron of other channels. And then 6 months later, I'm like, oh, it doesn't seem like there's need anymore, and I pull back. It's the nature. I'm not going to pop up every 6 months and be like, please, I need to pay. That's not going to be what happens here. And so that does mean things might ease and ebb and flow, and I don't know where those numbers go. But $2,500 a month, that's $30,000 a year. That's a decent amount of money off the bat. And it's, again, incredibly appreciative of it. I do have, content on Patreon. There's extra behind-the-scenes content. There's a monthly updates. There's a week in review. There's a dedicated weekly video that's about Kickstarter and all that stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff over on Patreon as well. But at the end of the day, I am getting 30K a year from Patreon, which is absolutely tremendous, incredibly appreciated, and also a third of the way towards what I need. The next step is YouTube. Now, YouTube, I'm not going to go into direct absolute numbers, partially because it ranges, and partially because, again, I don't feel the Patreon number is already there, so it's easier for me to be public about it. It's there. You can see it whenever you want. And I could hide it, by the way. It's a setting that I never chose to enact, and so it's there. YouTube, it ranges more. It does range depending on the month. The general YouTube numbers that they say out there, by the way, is that for every million views you're getting, you get around $2,000 to $5,000. That's the official number that they kind of say out there. I don't know how accurate it is across the board. I can tell you that in my case, I believe it's closer to the 5,000 number. I get roughly 500,000 views a month, and I get generally, I'm going to say 2,000 plus on YouTube a month. 2,000 plus because it does vary. The very nature of YouTube is it has a lot of interesting things going on. So for instance, doing holiday season, I get more. Doing holiday season like, Black Friday, all that, the price for ads goes higher, and therefore the amount of money going to YouTube is higher, and the amount of money I get per view is higher. So there is a range. I'm going to say I get 2,000 plus from YouTube. The plus is just that it depends on the month. So that's another 24 to 30K over there. That's pretty good, by the way. That's incredibly good. This goes back to the part where there's bridges to close here, there's gaps to close, but the fact that I'm already making, just from those two numbers alone, I'm already making close to 60K a year, that is absolutely tremendous and mind-boggling. Like, just mind-boggling. I remember when I first started this channel, I remember telling my wife that it would be really cool because, YouTube was on track to potentially make me a few thousand a year. I was like, that's really good extra money. And that's when I was viewing it as a side thing, as opposed to as I slowly transitioned to viewing it as potentially a full-time thing. But I'm tremendously, again, this is why, all things are true here. I am tremendously grateful for the position I'm in, while also needing to ensure that as I step off this bridge, there's something there to catch me. All things are true. We'll get to point 4 shortly. So already at 60K. What about the rest? Well, sponsorships is something that 60K-ish. Sponsorships is something that I plan on looking into. I already have some sponsorships lined up-ish kind of on the side, but like I said, altogether, if you added up all the money I've gotten from GameFound and every other, side sponsor I took, it's probably around $1,000. I have to double check the numbers, maybe a little higher. It adds up. It does. Don't get me wrong, and that's extra money. But that's not where the gap is closing. That's part of what I'm looking into to close the gap. Absolutely, but the gap is really primarily closed by the fact that my wife is a teacher and she does get paid over there, and so we do have extra money coming in. She's a part-time teacher. It's not a full income, and it's less than the 30 to 40K we need, just for transparency's sake or whatnot. And then Board Game Co. Board Game Co., the retail operation, also gives me a little side income. And the net numbers, all these numbers, when you add them all together, they all add up to roughly 90 plus K. That's where we are right now, roughly. And they're rough numbers, like where I am right now. And the Patreon push was a huge difference, by the way, because factor in that extra $600-700 a month that I'm getting now compared to last week. That's an extra $8,000 a year, which is a big difference when the numbers are lining up. And that's why, I'm tremendously appreciative of all of that. The past week has brought me from, I know that there's a gap to close. There's definitely a gap. The only question is exactly how much that gap is. And over the past week, I've moved from there's a gap to close to, is there a gap? How much is the gap? What's the gap look like? I'll need time to find out exactly what that is. And that's where this conversation also gets messy, because my goal is never to ask for money so I can, go out and buy a mansion. That's not anyone's problem at all. That's not happening, obviously. My expenses, for those who have a family of 6, you'll know that 90 to 100K is somewhere in the range of normalcy. Again, for some of you, it's going to be a very small number, comparatively speaking, and for some of you, it might be a large number, but it's definitely in the range of normalcy. I'm not a big spender by any means. I never have been. But so where I am right now is the range of numbers are going to be tight, but I don't know whether I'm losing or gaining, and it may take several months to find out. That's the practical aspect. I still think we're losing. It's just a question of what monthly expenses come up. Also, a big part of this, which is a little bit of an unknown aspect, is taxes. Taxes are a whole different conversation when you're self-employed and how much you have to set aside and manage all that. So hopefully everything's fine. At least, again, everything is fine. We'll get to that in a second. But hopefully everything's fine. But it leads to these ranges and questions of how everything lines up, how everything balances up, and where does everything come down to. So that's point number 3, effectively. How much do I make? How much do I need? And the answers are, with the recent Patreon bump, I might be fine-ish, we'll see, but I'm certainly less stressed this week than I was last week. Tremendously so. And tremendously, like, it's one of those weird things. Like, every part of me at every point in this video wants to scream how thankful I am to every single one of you. But if I keep doing it, it just feels empty. I've done it several times already. I've done it in the first video. I've done it in Patreon. I've done it on Patreon in multiple videos. I'm doing it in this video. No matter what happened, I already knew that I was walking into a situation that I was grateful for. And the past week has only further doubled down on that. The past week has only further doubled down on just how grateful I am for my position, for what I'm doing right now, for every one of you, for just life. I'm in a this like awkward long silence. I appreciate every one of you. And we're not done with the video, by the way. We're not done. This is just an interlude, because I feel like I'm 30 minutes into a video where I'm talking about how you all just closed the gap. Not like you all added a lot to my peace of mind, and it just feels wrong to not break down for a sec. So, point four. Let's give me a second here. Point 4. What's my plans? What's my approach to the situation? So I'm a very practical person in general. You should know that if you've been watching my channel for long enough. The first thing is that we have savings. The nice part about doing YouTube at the same time as a job is that meant extra money that, knowing this was coming, I've been putting that into savings and making sure that I basically could account for a shortfall. Meaning we could lose money and I'm not scrambling. I don't like it. It makes me very, very stressed to be losing money, to be running in the red, to be running a deficit makes me very stressed. Because then, as soon as you're running in a deficit, just practically speaking, if I'm making X and I'm spending Y, then every expense has to be further questioned. I consider myself, my family, we're fairly thrifty to begin with, but then suddenly every single expense is a further question that just adds a degree of, how irresponsible am I? If I buy that board game, if I back that board game on Kickstarter when I'm running in a red, that's terrible, right? I'm a bad person for doing that. But also as part of my job. So is it? I mean, I'm going to be reviewing games. It's messy. It gets messy quickly as soon as you're in the red, which is why I don't want to be in the red. No one does, practically speaking. But it's this weird aspect of, even though there is savings, I need to make sure that my income exceeds my expenses. Not today necessarily. I can live today. I can live tomorrow, next month, next whatever. But at a certain point, I need to ensure that my practical reality involves that my income is above my expenditures. I just need to ensure that. And that means I'll do whatever it takes to ensure that that is the case. Up to and including looking for another job, but I don't think it comes to that. You see, in my end, the practical reality is that there's a few things that happen. The first is that the very nature of doing this video might have another 100 of you sign up to become a patron, which would be, again, tremendously appreciated, but please only do so if you get value from the content. That's enough to close a gap, or should be enough to close a gap. There's also the GoFundMe, which is more focused. GoFundMe is more of a one-time thing, so that's more focused on just temporary equipment purchases. But there's all these other things that can happen as time goes on. The channel can continue growing. I don't have a firm picture of where the channel's ad revenue goes. You know, maybe a year from now, making $3,000 a month instead of $2,000 a month from YouTube. I don't think so. The trajectory I'm on right now does indicate the numbers go up, but it seems to be up very slowly. With the initial burst I saw in the first year and a half of the channel has mostly stabilized. I've been getting roughly 500,000 views a month for the past year now. The numbers haven't changed significantly. The subscribers go up, but the problem is subscribers come, subscribers go. They don't necessarily unsubscribe, but they watch less often than they used to. And so even as the subscribers constantly go up, the views, which is where the money comes from, those things have mostly stabilized. Will it continue to go up? Will it go down? I need more time to find out. At the end of the day, I've only been doing content creation for 2.5 years, and that doesn't lead a lot of time to see the trajectory of this channel. Subscribers don't pay the bills. Views and ads do. And so views and ad revenue from those views. And so that I don't have a firm picture, but that's part of where the gap could be closed. Maybe the ad revenue goes up over time. Maybe that aspect improves. Maybe the Patreon actually does continue to go up over time. Maybe whatever drop off there is as this emergency moment in time goes away, maybe that drop off isn't as steep as I think. Maybe people continue to watch my videos, see whatever. Maybe I'm a little more vocal in my Patreon pushes. Maybe GameFound comes along as a channel sponsor and is actually a consistent channel sponsor. There's 15 different ways that the gap can go from where am I to here, to I'm good, I'm fine, the numbers are safe again. There's a lot of options, and I'm not particularly panicked. Again, very much helped by every single one of you who has signed up in the past week and a half, whatever it's been since then. And so that's part of it. But what happens if those things don't happen? What is my approach to the situation if things don't stabilize? If my income is below my expenses and I'm just losing money every month? Well, the practical reality is at that point I need to decide between looking for a part-time or full-time job, which is something I don't think I want to do. Now that I finally stepped off the bridge, I feel it'll be a weird step backwards to do that. The practical reality is then I start engaging or dabbling in some form of direct publisher content, more publisher relationships. Right now I'm trying to stick to the peripherals. Right now I'm trying to stick to, having a game found, which is, Awaken Realms adjacent, which is already a problem, but at least it's a problem with one publisher. Having, BackerKit, which is board game adjacent, but it's not the direct publishers. Having board game tables, various board game table companies. Again, I'm trying to stick to the peripherals ideally, because the reason, I don't do Skillshare sponsorships. I don't want to. I'm not saying I won't. At the end of the day, the most important thing to me is that the gap gets closed. But I just don't like doing Skillshare sponsorships. I don't like seeing a Skillshare sponsorship. I don't care about the fact that, you see your Vessi shoes or your Raycon earbuds. I don't like doing adjacent content. I'd rather pitch content that I'd rather watch. And I don't mind seeing content related to the hobby that I'm in, but I do mind seeing, not mind, but I don't care about the peripherals. And so my ideal for a sponsorship is board game company adjacent, enough so that it's interesting to you, the viewer, but not so much that it's, directly the people I'm working with and reviewing their games. That's my ideal. But I will go down that rabbit hole as necessary, not to the nth degree. I really don't want to do paid preview content or paid review content. I really, really don't want to. I'm not saying I'm not willing to, but I don't think I'll need to. I think the numbers are close enough that I can do peripheral stuff. The next step for me, likely, if I need to, is at some point, maybe I start doing paid playthroughs. Kind of like without my opinion, but hey, you're doing a Kickstarter, I'll do a paid live playthrough. Maybe I start dabbling in the peripherals, taking money from people, but kind of leaving my opinion out of it in select cases. I don't have firm answers, and again, my goal is to not do that. At the end of the day, and hopefully this is clear to those of you who've watched the channel enough, I love this hobby. I love board games so much that the idea of doing a paid playthrough and then not giving my opinion on the experience just hurts me. I'm going to talk about the games because I played the games. I'm going to if I engage in the hobby, if I talk about the games, if I play the games, and if you ask me an opinion on the game, I'm not going to want to say, well, I don't really talk about paid play. I love board games too much to turn it into a direct financial relationship related to the coverage of games. Peripherals I can kind of dabble with, but direct content, just forget what you're comfortable with. I prefer not to. I just feel it might take some of the joy of the hobby out of it for me if there's more of a contractual relationship to the way I talk about your game. Anyone else who does it, I completely get it. There's many people can do it, many people do it in different ways, many people are able to bridge those lines in healthy ways. I'd rather avoid that. But again, the net takeaway of all that is I'm not starving. My family's not starving. We're completely fine. We have savings. We can survive several months just fine, burning through small amounts, whatever it is. And we have multiple options in front of us to ensure that we bridge whatever gap we need to responsibly. And we'll do so. The only real question on the table is just the decision points around what happens and all of that. I think it'll be unnecessary, honestly. Again, the past week has been a huge boon of support from all of you in terms of looking at a situation in which there's a gap and seeing that gap continue to close as the week has gone on. And it makes the entire process significantly easier. And for everything, for literally every single thing, from every subscriber, every viewer, every comment, every like, every degree of engagement you've ever had on the channel that has put me in the position where I'm able to do this years earlier than I had planned. Thank you. I love this hobby. Hopefully it comes through. I love this hobby. I love the people in this hobby. I love being able to do this every single day. If something I've said in the past in videos, and I mean it, is if you wrote me a blank check on life, if you just gave me all the money in the world, I would still do this. I'd probably pay people to edit my videos and do B-roll and stuff like that, but I would still do this if I didn't need the money. If I had a blank check on life, this is what I would choose to do. that's something that not a lot of people, a lot of people like their jobs. I've liked my job in the past. Like I've had good times in the jobs I've had, and I've enjoyed the aspect of just doing good work. There's something satisfying about it. But in none of the jobs I've ever dabbled in none of those jobs have I ever considered for a second that if I didn't need the money, I would still do them. I wouldn't. This I would. This is just too much fun. It's like, I mean, it's board games. Yeah. I'm incredibly grateful. Incredibly grateful for every single person who has been a part of this journey, this pathway. And that's going to be part of me getting to the part 3 video, which is the history of Alex. The I can't call it that. That's terrible, but it's a bit of a history of where I started from, how I got here. And YouTube is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I'm 33. YouTube has been a part of my life for 2.5 years. That's a tenth of my life. That's nothing. But I'm also looking at it like hopefully it's going to be the rest of my life. And you are all part of why that's even a possibility for me. So I'm gonna wrap this up before I continue to ramble unnecessarily into the long hours of the night. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I'll have a link to the Patreon and the GoFundMe down below. I tremendously appreciate every single one of you, regardless of what you're able to do, regardless of what you do, and with full understanding. Again, I am someone who watches many channels, and I'm only a patron of a handful of them. So there's no judgment whatsoever. We all make decision calls about what we're going to do and what the situations are. And again, I'm fine. That's not the question. The question is just what I end up doing to ensure that gaps are closed over time. Not today, not tomorrow, but over time. I'm going to keep rambling. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., which I know I said already. And as always, have a good one.